When Evelyn Harper inherited an old, rusted tugboat that nobody wanted, people laughed. Sell it, they said. It's junk. But buried beneath that corroded deck was a secret no one saw coming: a perfectly preserved hidden submarine. What she found inside didn't just change her life. It unearthed a Cold War mystery, rewrote her family legacy, and gave a struggling single mom a second chance no one believed she deserved. This isn't just a story about an inherited tugboat. It's about the power of holding on when the world tells you to let go. Stay with us because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's get started. When Evelyn stood at the edge of that forgotten dock in a quiet corner of Oregon's coastline, the November wind bit through her coat like the voices of everyone who told her she was crazy. Sell it, Evelyn. It's junk, they'd scoffed. You need help, not another burden. And maybe they were right. After all, what kind of inheritance was this? Not a house, not money, just a rust-eaten tugboat, moored like a ghost from the past. The paint was peeling, ropes frayed, and gulls used the deck more than any sailor had in decades. But Evelyn wasn't just anyone. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman who'd buried dreams when her husband passed away, and who now worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. The tugboat had belonged to her estranged grandfather, a man she barely remembered. And yet, something about that old boat pulled her in. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was madness. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't ready to walk away. Evelyn didn't return to the tugboat for a few days. The first visit had left her shaken not because of what she saw, but because of what she felt. That old boat wasn't just wood and rust. It was a memory waiting to be remembered. A whisper of something lost. But when the electric bill arrived and her bank balance hovered close to zero, she knew she couldn't ignore it. If nothing else, she could salvage metal, maybe sell parts. With a borrowed crowbar in one hand and a flashlight in the other, she climbed back aboard the vessel on a gray Saturday morning. The inside smelled like wet rope and old stories. Mildew clung to the corners of the cabin, and every surface was caked in dust thick enough to write history with your fingers. Evelyn sighed, coughing through her scarf as she began ripping out moldy cushions and tossing out empty beer cans that looked older than her. "This is hopeless," she muttered. "What am I even doing?" She was ready to call it a day when her boot struck something beneath the floorboards. A hollow thunk. Not the usual echo of rotted wood, this was deeper, denser. She knelt down and knocked again. Same sound. A hidden chamber. She tilted her head. Could just be a rotted support beam, or maybe a storage space. But her heart beat faster anyway. She pried open a panel, the screws so rusted they crumbled, and there it was. A metal surface beneath the planks, cold, smooth, industrial. Her flashlight beam wavered. "What the hell is that?" The light flickered over bolts and seams in the floor, too symmetrical, too deliberate. She ran her hand across it. Definitely metal. Definitely not part of any tugboat design she'd seen in the marine blogs she'd stayed up reading the night before. Her breath caught. There was more here than anyone had known. She spent the rest of the weekend pulling up flooring, layer by layer. Each board she removed revealed more of the strange structure beneath. A curve, a shape, a shell of something. Larger. On Sunday afternoon, Ryan, a local mechanic and friend from the diner, stopped by out of curiosity. He stood on the dock, arms crossed, squinting at her work. "You're seriously doing this?" he asked, half amused, half concerned. Evelyn looked up, her face smudged with dust. "There's something under this boat. Ryan, something big." "Like what treasure?" he laughed. She didn't laugh back. "No, like another boat, or part of one. Ryan frowned, then stepped aboard. It didn't take long before he too was staring at the smooth metal casing below their feet. "This isn't part of a tugboat," he whispered. "I think—" "Evelyn, I think this is a submarine." The word hit her like thunder. A submarine inside a tugboat. It sounded insane. But once Ryan said it, she couldn't unsee it, the curved metal hull, the sealed hatch outline hidden beneath the grime, the way the structure arched like the back of something ancient and sleeping. Word got out fast. By Wednesday, local teenagers were sneaking onto the dock trying to snap pictures. By Thursday, a reporter from the local paper came by asking questions Evelyn couldn't answer. She hadn't even fully exposed it yet. But the whispers had started, "Woman finds submarine in dead man's tugboat," "Cold War relic hidden in plain sight," "Ghost ship or smuggler's dream," "Inside." Evelyn felt torn. She didn't want attention, but she needed answers. Why would her grandfather hide a submarine inside a tugboat? How had it gone unnoticed for decades? That night, she found herself sitting on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. The same wind from before whipped around her, but it felt different now, like it was leading her somewhere. She whispered into the dark, "What were you hiding?" "Grandpa." The next morning, she borrowed a power saw from Ryan and cut through the remaining planks. Sparks flew, and the sound screamed across the harbor. When the final board dropped away, she stood over the curved metal beast in awe. It was like discovering a fossil, sleek, intact, untouched by time. There was a small hatch with a sealed handle. She wiped the grime away and saw something engraved, a symbol. Faded. A circle intersected by 3 jagged lines like lightning bolts or scars. Not military, not commercial. It felt personal. She ran her fingers across it, heart pounding. This was no ordinary vessel. Whatever this was, whatever her grandfather had been involved in it, had been buried here for a reason. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She dug through the box of her grandfather's old belongings the lawyer had given her after the inheritance. Inside were mostly books and papers receipts, postcards from the 1960s, a compass. But at the very bottom, tucked between 2 yellowed manuals, was a small, water-damaged notebook. She opened it. The handwriting was shaky, scribbled in pencil. Dates, coordinates, names she didn't recognize. And at the top of one page, the Leviathan Project. They must never find it. Evelyn gasped. Her hands trembled. She looked back toward the dock, where the shape of the hidden submarine still loomed in the shadows. This wasn't just a mystery. It was the beginning of something that could change her life forever. By the end of that storm-tossed week, Evelyn wasn't just the woman with the weird boat anymore. She had become something else entirely, the keeper of a secret. A strange vessel was lying dormant under her feet, and the town's curiosity was growing louder, more relentless. Reporters started camping out near the dock. Someone flew a drone overhead, which Evelyn knocked out of the sky with a well-aimed broom. Ryan joked that she was becoming a folk hero. But Evelyn didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to jump, with no idea what lay below. Still, there was one thing she knew: she had to open that hatch. With Ryan's help, and after 2 solid hours of cutting, unscrewing, and muttered curses, the circular metal hatch finally groaned. Years of salt and time had locked it tight. But as they pried it open with a grinding screech, the scent of old oil and sealed air rushed out like a forgotten breath. They both stood still. No one said a word. Evelyn reached for her flashlight and pointed it inside. There it was, the interior of a submarine, silent, sleek, preserved like a time capsule. The floor was slanted slightly downward, leading into darkness. Steel walls lined with small compartments, old control panels with levers and dials, many still labeled. The lights were dead, of course, but somehow it all felt alive, like it had only just gone to sleep. "This can't be real," Ryan whispered. "This thing's pristine." They climbed inside cautiously. Each step echoed through the chamber. Dust floated in the light like frozen snow. It was cramped but spacious enough for a small crew. Bunks were still made up. Cans of food sat on a shelf. Labels faded. A cracked mug rested on a tiny table. And then Evelyn saw it. A small emblem painted on the back wall, the same one etched on the hatch, the 3 jagged lines slashing through a circle. She pulled out the notebook and held it up. Identical. There was no doubt now, this was the Leviathan project. But what was it? Military private. Some kind of Cold War prototype? Nothing about it looked standard. The equipment was a strange hybrid military grade mixed with handmade components. There were strange antenna-like rods mounted inside, and what looked like a large underwater propulsion system far too advanced for anything from the 1960s. At the back of the chamber, near what appeared to be the engine room, Evelyn found something else, a steel locker sealed with a dial code. Scratched on the surface was one word: "Do not open." Ryan glanced at her. "That's not ominous at all." They didn't open it, not yet. Some things needed time. Answers would come. But for now, Evelyn knew enough. Her grandfather hadn't just left her an old boat. He'd hidden something powerful, something dangerous, something he didn't want the world to find. And now it was hers. Word spread fast. A YouTuber posted drone footage of the hatch being opened, and within 48 hours, the video had over 2 million views. The press camped out like moths to a flame. Evelyn turned them away. A man in a government suit showed up on the dock and tried to ask questions. She told him to come back with a warrant. He didn't. The local historical society offered her funding to preserve the site. A museum in Seattle offered to buy the entire vessel. Treasure hunters offered even more. But Evelyn didn't want to sell. Not yet. Every night. She returned to the submarine. She sat inside it, running her fingers across the walls, listening to the echoes of lives that had once passed through this place. One night, while sorting through a drawer near the helm, she found a stack of water-damaged photographs tucked inside a metal box. Most were ruined beyond recognition, but one caught her breath. It was a picture of her grandfather, young, proud, standing in front of the submarine, hand resting on the hull like it was a living thing. Beside him stood a woman, tall, sharp-eyed, wearing a flight jacket. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "We launch tonight. God forgive us if they find it." Evelyn sat down hard, heart pounding. This wasn't just some hidden treasure. This was a story buried for decades, a secret project, a mystery that had cost people something, maybe even everything. And now she was part of it. That night, as wind howled through the harbor and rain tapped against the rusted deck, Evelyn locked the tugboat's gate behind her and whispered into the night, "I don't know what you built, Grandpa, but I promise I'll protect it." In that moment, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just a waitress, not just a single mom, not just a woman patching together a life from scraps and sorrow. She was a keeper of something extraordinary. And the story was just beginning. The days after the discovery felt like a dream wrapped in fog. Evelyn found herself pacing the docks long after sunset, whispering questions into the salt-heavy wind as though the sea itself held the answers. Who had built this submarine? Why was it buried beneath an old tugboat? And most of all, why had her grandfather gone to such great lengths to hide it? She returned to the notebook. Dozens of pages, smudged with water and time, were nearly illegible. But in between the decay were fragments, coordinates, initials, odd sketches of underwater maps, and references to Phase 3 propulsion and Leviathan run. One line repeated more than once, underlined each time. Not for the Navy, not for war, for escape. Escape from what? The more Evelyn read, the deeper the mystery grew. She brought the notebook to the small local historical society tucked inside the town library. It was run by Eleanor, a retired schoolteacher with an obsession for maritime history and a collection of antique maps older than most buildings in town. Eleanor stared at the symbol on the back of the notebook, the 3 jagged lines cutting through a circle, and immediately pulled out an old binder. "I've seen this before," she said softly. "Once. Years ago. An article in a forgotten Cold War magazine." She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling slightly. There it was. A black and white grainy photo of a man who looked almost like Evelyn's grandfather. Same eyes, same posture, but younger, more defiant. The caption read, "Unknown engineer linked to Leviathan prototype, a civilian design lost to time." According to the article, a small group of rogue engineers frustrated by military misuse of technology had gone underground during the late 1950s. They aimed to build a prototype submarine unlike any seen before. Something not for battle, but for survival. Some thought it was a Cold War bunker on water. Others believed it was designed for underwater colonization. But then the story disappeared. No names, no evidence, just rumors of a project that vanished under the tide of history. Eleanor looked up at Evelyn, her voice barely above a whisper. "If this is real, you're sitting on something people have tried to forget." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She walked back to the tugboat, climbed down into the submarine, and sat beside the sealed locker labeled "Do Not Open." Her fingers hovered over the dial. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she wandered through the narrow halls. The silence wasn't just emptiness, it was memory, a suspended breath, a vessel built not for war, but for escape, and sealed like a tomb. She found herself speaking aloud, not knowing why. "Did you try to run? Grandpa, what were you running from?" She imagined him, hands covered in grease, head bowed over blueprints, arguing with men in quiet rooms, whispering about principles and promises. Evelyn thought back to all the nights she'd sat at the diner counter after closing, staring at a cracked photo of her grandfather on the wall. A silent man. Brilliant, but distant. She had always thought he'd abandoned the family out of selfishness. But what if he had left to protect them? Suddenly, everything began to feel different. The tugboat wasn't a burden, it was a vault. A secret entrusted to her. He hadn't given up on her. He had chosen her. Out of everyone. Her. Her perspective shifted like a tide turning under the moon. For the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't feel powerless. She felt chosen. And it scared her. The next morning, someone broke into the dock. Evelyn arrived to find the gate unlatched and muddy footprints leading across the deck. The hatch to the submarine had been left slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she raced inside, flashlight trembling. The locker was untouched. But something else was gone, the notebook. She stumbled back onto the dock, panic in her throat. Who had been here? Why take the notebook and leave everything else? It couldn't have been kids. This was targeted. She called Ryan. Someone stole the journal. He arrived minutes later, pale-faced and angry. "We need to lock this place down. Cameras, alarms, whatever you can afford." Evelyn shook her head. I can't afford anything." He paused. "Then we ask for help." And so she did. For the first time, Evelyn told her story not to the press, not to treasure hunters, but to the town, at a community center meeting. She stood in front of old neighbors, fishermen, cashiers, teenagers who used to call her the ghost lady at the diner, and she told them everything. No drama, no sensationalism, just the truth. "My grandfather left me something strange," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't fully understand what it is, but I think it matters. I think it was built to save people. And now someone's trying to steal that truth." There was silence. Then someone in the back stood up. It was an older man, bent by time, with calloused hands. "My brother worked the docks in '62, he said. Told me once he saw a boat being towed at night, no lights, no name. He said it hummed like it had a heart. Said it gave him chills." A murmur passed through the room. They remembered. They knew something strange had passed through their town. The community rallied. Within a day, a local locksmith offered to reinforce the tugboat's doors. A retired electrician wired up security lights. Ryan installed cameras, paid for out of his own pocket. And Evelyn stood on the deck that night, watching the town come alive behind her, not in fear, but in protection. The tugboat wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to all of them. The mystery wasn't just hers to solve, it was theirs to preserve. That night, Evelyn stood again before the locker. This time, she didn't hesitate. She turned the dial. One click, then two, then silence. It didn't open. Not yet. But she would try again tomorrow. Because now, she wasn't alone. And whatever secrets were buried in the steel bones of that submarine, she was ready to face them. The news had spread beyond the town now. What started as whispers among curious fishermen and late-night diners had evolved into national headlines. Widowed waitress uncovers secret submarine beneath inherited tugboat. The story felt too surreal to be true, yet it was. Evelyn now stood in the center of a modern legend, and though the world was watching, her heart remained anchored to one thing: the locker still sealed inside the submarine. She tried different combinations day after day, birthday numbers, map coordinates, dates from the journal before it was stolen. Nothing worked. And yet, the mystery itself became her compass. One morning, Evelyn woke up to find a silver Airstream parked just outside the dock fence. A sharply dressed woman in her 60s, wearing aviator sunglasses and a scarf, stepped out and introduced herself as Dr. Madeline Cross, an expert in Cold War technology and naval archives from the University of Washington. "I'm not here to buy you out," she said, reading Evelyn's cautious expression. "I'm here to help you understand what you have." Evelyn hesitated, but something in the woman's voice measured. Sincere invited trust. They spent hours in the submarine, tracing wires, cataloging strange devices, and inspecting faded serial numbers. Dr. Cross identified elements never before used in any known Navy project. "This wasn't built for war," she murmured. "It was built to outlast war." She shared theories Evelyn had never considered about deep-sea survival crafts, escape capsules for high-level targets, and even whispers of an unsanctioned peace movement that believed the world's powerful should retreat rather than retaliate if nuclear war ever came. It was radical, and maybe insane. But Evelyn had already learned sometimes the impossible was simply something that hadn't been understood yet. That same week, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, postmarked from a remote town in Canada. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, scribbled in block letters. "The locker opens with the last date he saw you." Her chest tightened. The last time Evelyn had seen her grandfather was when she was 8 years old. He had taken her to a fairground. They'd ridden the Ferris wheel, eaten cotton candy, and he'd given her a brass compass, telling her, "This will always bring you home." She never saw him again, but she remembered the date. July 14th, 1998. She returned to the submarine alone that night. Her hands trembled as she turned the dial. 7, 14, 98. Click! A long, mechanical whir echoed through the chamber. The locker hissed and popped open. Inside was not treasure, not gold, but something far rarer truth. A stack of tapes, old VHS and Hi-Q8 camcorder recordings, a leather folder marked L, Project, Private, a dusty hard drive sealed in watertight plastic, and a letter. Folded. Yellowed. Addressed in elegant handwriting. To Evelyn. She opened it with shaking fingers. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then the sea has finally brought you back to me. I didn't abandon you. I couldn't. I was part of something. Something too dangerous to leave exposed, and too important to destroy. They told me to vanish, to forget, to let the project die quietly, but I couldn't let it all be erased. Not what we built, not what we believed in. The Leviathan was never meant to be a weapon. It was a lifeboat for a sinking species, a way out when the world lost its mind. But I realized too late that the greatest escape isn't underwater. It's forgiveness, family, you. You were always the only one I trusted with the truth, and now it's yours. Do with it what I couldn't bring it into the light. Love, Grandpa Walter." Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks. She sat in silence for a long while, cradling the letter like a second heartbeat. By morning, everything had changed. Dr. Cross helped her verify the contents. The tapes showed early test dives, interviews with engineers, and a haunting video of Walter speaking into the camera, explaining the dream behind Leviathan, a dream built on peace, survival, and legacy. Evelyn made a decision. She wasn't going to sell the tugboat. She wasn't going to donate it either. She was going to share it on her terms. With the town's help, she set up a GoFundMe. They named it Leviathan Rising. Within days, donations flooded in, not from corporations, but from people, veterans, historians, single parents, college students, people who saw in Evelyn's story a flicker of something they'd lost hope. The tugboat and submarine would be restored, not as relics, but as a floating museum, a living story, a reminder of what one woman armed with nothing but grit, grief, and a compass from the past could uncover when she refused to walk away. Media outlets requested exclusive interviews. She turned most of them down. But she agreed to one a documentary by an independent filmmaker who promised to keep the soul of the story intact. The film was called Below the Rust. On the opening day of the dock exhibition, people lined up around the harbor. Children climbed onto the deck, their eyes wide. Veterans stood in silence inside the sub, running fingers across the walls, whispering names of friends long gone. And Evelyn stood beside them all, hand resting on the hull, eyes full of tears but no longer from sorrow. She had found more than a hidden submarine. She had found purpose. The restoration took months. Every bolt Evelyn turned, every flake of rust she scraped off, felt like peeling away the years both from the vessel and from herself. Gone was the woman who once whispered apologies into her cold coffee, who stared blankly at overdue bills and told her son, maybe next year. That Evelyn had slowly, silently sunk beneath the weight of life. But here, surrounded by the clang of tools and the voices of volunteers who believed in her vision, something in her began to rise. People came not just to help, but to heal. Veterans shared stories they hadn't told in decades. A widower left flowers on the sub's hatch every Sunday. For those who never came home, he said. Teenagers who once tagged her fence with graffiti now handed her fresh paint cans. They called her Captain Evelyn. She laughed the first time they did, and then she cried. But it wasn't all easy. The pressure of running the project began to weigh on her. Journalists poked into her past, digging up debts, lost jobs, even the custody battle she'd fought and won after her husband's accident. One tabloid ran the headline, "Waitress or opportunist woman's tugboat tale raises eyebrows." Evelyn read it alone in the back of the diner one night and nearly folded. "Maybe I'm not enough," she whispered. "Maybe they're right." Ryan found her there, eyes red, hands trembling. He sat beside her, silent for a moment, then handed her something, a photo. It was one of the submarine's bunks. Lying on it was the compass her grandfather had given her, freshly polished, with a note underneath written in block letters. "You were always enough. You just needed to remember." "I found it wedged behind the navigation panel," Ryan said quietly. "He hid it where only you would know to look." Her knees gave out. The sob that left her body wasn't delicate or graceful, it was raw, full of years of exhaustion, grief, and unmet dreams. But in that release, she felt reborn. As the submarine neared completion, Evelyn began speaking at small events, libraries, schools, even veteran support groups. Not about technology, about legacy. She told the story of how she'd almost sold the tugboat, how she'd almost believed everyone who said she was just a waitress, a widow, a woman too late in life to start again. And then she'd pause, hold up the brass compass, and say, "Sometimes, what looks like a dead end is just a locked door, and all it takes to open it is believing you were meant to find the key." The day before the museum launch, Evelyn stood alone inside the submarine. Everything had been cleaned, restored, preserved. The control panels gleamed softly under gentle lighting. Visitors would begin pouring in the next morning. But she needed one last moment, just her and him. She pulled out the final tape from the sealed locker. It had no label. She inserted it into the restored monitor beside the helm. The screen flickered. There he was, Grandpa Walter, gray at the temples, eyes tired but fierce. "If you're watching this, Evelyn, then you found me, or at least what I left behind." He paused. "I wasn't brave enough to finish what I started. I let fear and secrecy and regret pull me under. But you kept going, and because of that, maybe this vessel won't be buried in silence. Maybe it'll carry voices instead of ghosts." He looked directly into the camera, as though he could see her through time. "You weren't supposed to carry my mistakes. But you did something better. You gave them meaning, and you gave me peace." The tape ended in static. Evelyn didn't wipe away the tears this time. She let them fall. "The grand opening was a phenomenon." Lines wrapped around the harbor. A local choir sang sea shanties from the 1940s. Children climbed into the tugboat's wheelhouse and rang the brass bell. The submarine's interior was opened in guided tours, each one led by Evelyn herself. But there was one final surprise. During the last tour of the day, as the sun set fire to the waves outside, Evelyn stopped beside the sealed locker and turned to the group. "I never told anyone what this project meant to me," she said. "But I think now's the time." She held up the compass. "This belonged to the man who built this vessel and who believed it should stay hidden. But today, I'm returning it to its rightful place." She placed the compass back inside the locker, sealing it with care. Not to hide it again, but to honor it, to let the submarine rest, whole again. That night, Evelyn walked the length of the dock barefoot. The stars above the water shimmered like old promises kept. The tugboat rocked gently beneath her feet, no longer a burden, but a bridge. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, "I found you, Grandpa, but more importantly, I found myself." And somewhere in the distance, the sea answered back. The tugboat, once a forgotten ghost on the harbor, now stood reborn, painted in deep navy blue with accents of gold, its railings polished, its hull steady, proud. Locals no longer called it that rusty wreck. Now they called it the Evelyn. She hadn't wanted them to rename it. She'd argued, even blushed, but the town insisted. "You gave it a second life," they told her. "It's only fair it bears your name." And so it did. Beneath it, the submarine rested like a heartbeat under skin hidden, but alive. It became more than an exhibit. It became a symbol of courage, of legacy, of choosing to listen when the world tells you to give up. The museum thrived. Veterans wept silently in the narrow hallways of the sub. Children asked questions with bright eyes and sharp minds. Travelers arrived from across the country, not to see a machine, but to meet the woman who refused to let the past drown in silence. Evelyn became a speaker not because she had perfect words, but because her story didn't need perfection. It just needed truth. One afternoon, during a school visit, a young girl tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. "Miss Evelyn," she asked, shyly, "did you ever get scared?" Evelyn knelt to the girl's level and smiled. "All the time," she said softly. "But I kept going anyway." The girl nodded like she understood something bigger than her age. "I'm scared a lot, too." Evelyn touched her hand. "Then you're braver than most grown-ups I know." That moment stayed with her. Because the truth was, this journey didn't make Evelyn fearless. It simply made her honest. She was still that woman who'd once cried in the diner's kitchen. Still the mother who had counted change at the grocery store, hoping it'd be enough. But now, she was also something more. Someone who had faced the storm and refused to be washed away. As months passed, the Tugboat Museum became a safe haven not just for history, but for healing. One visitor left a folded note on the sub's helm. It read, "I came here to see a submarine. I left, remembering who I used to be." Another donated a photo of her late husband, a Navy diver lost in 1974. "He would have loved this," she whispered through tears. Ryan, who had stood beside Evelyn since the first rusted knock on the floorboards, eventually left a small velvet box on her bunk, with no note, just a compass inside, engraved with 2 words. "Still here?" Evelyn cried for hours that night, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she had made it. She had walked through fire and come out not burned, but brighter. 1 year after the opening, a special event was held at the harbor, a candlelit remembrance called the Night of the Tide. Hundreds gathered with floating lanterns, each one carrying the name of someone they missed, someone they loved, or someone they forgave. The water glowed with warm light, like the sea was remembering with them. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dock, holding her own lantern. It simply read, "Walter, I understand now. Thank you." She released it, and as it drifted out into the harbor, a breeze rose up, not cold, but gentle, like a hand on her back saying, "You did good, kid." And maybe it was just wind, or maybe it was something more. That night, long after the lanterns had faded and the harbor had grown still, Evelyn climbed aboard the tugboat one more time. She stepped inside the submarine, sat on the bunk, and whispered into the quiet. "You gave me your secret, Grandpa, but the real treasure wasn't under the floorboards. It was inside me all along. I just needed a reason to believe again." And that was the truth. The old tugboat hadn't just revealed a submarine. It had uncovered her strength, her story, her second chance. The next morning, the sun rose over the bay, casting golden light across the hull of the Evelyn. Tourists took pictures. Children laughed. The town buzzed with life. And somewhere in the breeze, if you listened close enough, you could still hear the echoes of a man who once built a lifeboat for the world and the woman who turned it into a beacon for the soul. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can discover isn't hidden under rust or water. It's who you become when you refuse to let go. Anyone can uncover something extraordinary if they're brave enough to stay when others walk away. As the sun set over the quiet harbor, Evelyn Harper stood on the deck of the once-forgotten tugboat, her hand resting gently on the hatch of the submarine hidden beneath. She wasn't charting her grandfather's path anymore. She was lighting a new one for everyone who had ever been handed something broken, rusted, or left behind, and dared to believe it was worth saving. This wasn't just her legacy now. It belonged to every single mom who'd been told she'd never rebuild, every veteran who needed a place to remember, every child who wanted to believe in the magic hidden just below the surface. The woman they laughed at had become the keeper of something greater than history. Because for Evelyn and for all of us, the past isn't always a weight. Sometimes it's a key, and when you choose to turn it, you just might unlock your second chance. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true inspired stories are waiting for you. Click to keep uncovering hope with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that buried dreams deserve to rise again.